So what I specifically care about is autism. Do people nod or shaking heads? Do people have some kind of sense of what autism is or is not? I'm seeing mostly nodding heads. Cool. So to kind of give some kind of common symptoms, we might talk about, say, social anxiety, impairments, obsessive interests, ritualistic behaviour, stimmings is kind of commonly known, which might be rocking back and forth, shaking of hands, and also sensory sensitivity, so very bright lights, very loud noises. In terms of prevalence, the kind of commonly thrown around statistic is about 1 in 100 people. However, the Centre for Disease Control, the amazing name of, observes that there is this really kind of growing prevalence in childhood diagnosis, so which is up now in 2012 to about 1 in 68. The case being that, for whatever reason, diagnosis is going up, and it is much more common for young boys to be diagnosed. That's quite a controversial thing. There's a lot that I could unpack in that, but just know that it's something that at present is more diagnosed amongst men. So why do I care about it? Because I think a lot of times whenever I talk about autism, the reaction to it is, well, yeah, but it's not something... I mean, it's not like if you're visually impaired and you can't see a screen. You can see a screen, you can touch a screen. Why do you care about autism? Well, because the web is social, right? Like, what is like 99.9% of people's interaction with their smartphones and their computers these days? It's logged on Facebook, right? If the definition of what people use for the web is Facebook and is social, you need to care about something where there's a huge amount of users that maybe aren't social in the way that you are social. As well, it's super sensory, so similarly, if we are talking about individual users who maybe have some kind of sensory sensitivity, and you're saying, hey, we have some YouTube videos, have fun, or similarly again on Facebook, and you're scrolling through and you have automatically playing videos, so scrolling down, bright lights, scrolling down, bright lights, that's perhaps not the best engagement. Similarly, so if we kind of take it out of the web and also for the internet, we can think that the biggest uses of it are social. So for example, gaming now with things like MOBAs, stuff like PUBG, you don't necessarily need to know what I mean by them, just that they are online multiplayer games with like literally millions of players. So what gaming is nowadays is something that maybe isn't amenable to autism. Similarly, so what seems to be happening with a lot of design practices is they are becoming more emotion-based and more casual. So for example, animojis, I hate that name, but I'm sure everyone does, is the basis of, hey, I'm going to use my facial expression to say things to you. And this has kind of already happened with emojis, but emojis are pretty obvious usually. But if we're starting to get more granular with those, and we're going from the very obvious happy smiley, sad smiley, to something more nuanced, well, you need to think about users that perhaps don't interpret facial expressions, again, in the way that you do. So what can I do right here and now? Well, in my day-to-day work, I will do something, for example, I'll apply the WCAG, so the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to websites, to apps. And I'll say, well, okay, you've got some auto-playing videos. That's a problem. It's not just a problem for people with autism. So, for example, imagine that I'm using a screen reader. So I'm visually impaired and I use a screen reader to interact with websites. I don't see the screen, I hear the screen. And it's a bit of a problem if I jump onto a page and suddenly I'm hearing audio playing. I'm suddenly having a video playing because, okay, I can no longer hear my screen reader, and that's 100% of how I interact with the website. But what about more specifically with autism? Well, this is something that a friend of mine gave as an example. She had an Android device, and her kind of stimming behaviour was rocking her hands like this. It was kind of a coping mechanism that made her feel good about herself. It didn't hurt anyone. The problem being that when she did this, the flashlight on her phone would soon on and off. And some kind of interaction designer at some point thought, I know, I don't want people to have to swipe up and press the flashlight button. That's a bit weird. I can't have a flashlight button there. I know. I'll shake it, and suddenly the flashlight goes on. The problem with her is that she would turn herself into a lighthouse when it would go on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, simply because she wasn't what the designers thought about. So again, I talked a bit about the WCAG, and if you design anything, it might be a website, it might be an app, at some point you'll come across these guidelines. They are, I don't want to call them the law, but they are the de facto standard of accessibility, mostly for the web, but they are then taken to design buildings, mobile applications, etc. And there are some things that I can kind of pick out of it to say, well, okay, I can apply this to autism. Audio control, I've kind of already talked about with auto-playing videos. Pause, stop, and hide. Basically, if you think that a carousel is a good design pattern for your website, you're wrong, it's not, carousels are terrible. On input is the simple thing of nothing unexpected should happen if I input. So, for example, a huge paradigm for us at the BuildNet is keyboard interaction. So a very, very quick way to test anything you make, assuming it's, say, desktop-based, is, well, if I remove my mouse and I just tab through the page, I'm just keeping the tab key, can I get through every interaction point? And the answer should be yes. And if the answer is, well, I can tab onto this element, then I tab onto this element and weird stuff happens, it would fail on input. There's also like consistent navigation and identification, which is just that everything should be logical, it should make sense. You shouldn't have some kind of navigation over here and then some different navigation over here. In as much as, I said, especially with autism, if you consider users that have a very rigid mindset and perhaps think in a black and white mindset, you're not necessarily doing them any favours in their interaction if you are developing systems that go from one extreme to another. And so the keyword is predictability. Some checks fall under the AAA success criteria, which I won't explain. I can answer questions about it at the end. But basically, there's multiple levels, and AAA is the level that generally doesn't get talked about very much because it gets very granular, very specific, and quite difficult to achieve. The point is that sort of things like reading level are there, and other things just aren't captured at all, that just don't seem to be on the radar of accessibility. One example being gentle colours. So, for example, when I talk about sensory sensitivity, bright lights, although similarly say garish colours, really kind of scary colours, which just can cause kind of sensory overload, if you've kind of heard of that term. Okay, so today's general topic is going beyond the screen, so I now want to talk a bit more about some examples of technology being used for autism that kind of aren't just traditional interfaces. And we're going to talk about what they are, how they can affect autism, but good things they can do, but also negatives of them. Two things, so with anxiety therapy, with the Blue Room, and with emotional agnosia with Seeing AI. When I mean agnosia, it's just an impairment in the ability to perceive or process, so the difficulty in understanding, perceiving, etc. emotions. So the Blue Room is a collaboration with Newcastle and the NHS. It's a kind of augmented reality or virtual reality environment that's designed to help kids with autism, basically. A big thing with autism is, say, fears and phobias that have come across, say, with ritualistic thinking or social anxiety. And traditional therapies don't seem to work fantastically. So the example is, say, CBT, or cognitive behavioural therapy. A problem with that is that it often relies on imagination. It will ask the kids to sit down and picture this in your head and work your way through it. And you'll have autistic kids sit around and say, what? I don't understand. What do you mean, picture it in my head? So what they do here in this example is they essentially model out the forms of their social anxieties, their fears, their phobias, in controllable VR, or rather AR environments, where they're essentially in a room with walls that then have projectors on, and they can move through it with an iPad device. The idea being that it makes it real, it makes it literal, and it makes it something that is at their fingertips to control, such that they can say, okay, you're feeling anxious, you can literally stop this world. And it's incredibly effective when compared to, say, traditional therapies. However, so that's a very good point, but what's a kind of caveat I would put on it? So I'm hoping the answer is going to be yes, because hopefully you all know lots about HCI and UX, etc. Do people know what the uncanny valley is? Again, shaking heads, nodding heads, mostly nodding heads. Does anyone really not know what it is? Awesome. So something I come across a lot when talking about autism is people often say, oh, well, so with social anxiety, I mean, we can develop robots, right, and kind of companion robots and things like that. And I say, yeah, there's quite a few. And people always say to me, God, they're scary looking, aren't they? And I go, yeah, they are scary looking. That's kind of the point. So the traditional model of the uncanny valley takes this idea of we get to a point where things get scary, but it kind of comes back out again eventually. We get out of that valley when things are suitably human enough that we suddenly feel comfortable with them again. The problem being that if you're thinking about users who perhaps don't have that social anxiety, that perhaps think to themselves, yeah, but I don't really like being around human beings. I don't like talking to people. And not in a way of like, oh, I don't like it. It really freaks me out being around other human beings. So actually, I prefer the uncanny. I prefer the thing that looks freaky and weird to you. So, for example, if you just Google things like autism companion robots, you'll look at them and you'll think that they look weird. And I can tell you, yeah, and the designers meant it that way. Another one is also, say, robot animals. The example here is a seal that was initially designed for nursing homes. So, say, for people who don't see their family very often, they can just have this little companion pet, and it has, say, has kind of purring motions when you stroke it. You can kind of feed it. It's kind of like a Tamagotchi, but I want to say less maintenance and fluffier. But the broader point being that it's not human. You don't have to say, I want to build something, some kind of simulation or something that's real I can give to people that isn't a human that can help them. Sure, but don't necessarily assume that you need to conquer the uncanny valley and get out the other side and make something that isn't indistinguishable from a human, because you might be doing something that's actually going the wrong way. So the other example is emotional agnosia. Have people heard at all of Seeing AI? No. Please, during lunch break when you come, please Google Seeing AI. There's a fantastic video that Microsoft put out on YouTube. I'm seeing some people making notes, so you better watch it. It was initially designed by Microsoft's research and development for people with visual impairments. So the example being that it is based on machine learning, where I can point a camera at things, and it will say what it is. So I can point at this, press a button, it'll say, oh, that's the projector. Oh, that's your laptop. But then I can get more advanced, where I can point it as a person, and I won't try to describe a person at the risk of actually offending them. But so let's assume there's a pseudo person in front of me and might say, male, late 30s, looks happy, that kind of stuff. And again, that's great for visual impairments, in as much as it takes that paradigm of the screen reader, where I load my screen reader, I load a website, and it says, BBC homepage, and you tap, and it says, weather today, link, and you go, okay, I can press the enter button to get the weather today. This takes that and it puts it in the real world. It makes something that I can actually use outside of the computer. But the point of it with autism is this idea of like, so I said it was initially built for the phone, but in the video that you should all watch, it was actually then built into some glasses. So you might have kind of come across this stuff with, say, Google Glass or similar. And the idea being that I can look at people, I can make this gesture to kind of activate, and it'll say, okay, you're looking at this person, their engagement level seems to be about 90%, they seem to be quite happy, this is the emotion they're expressing. And having talked to Microsoft, the idea was like, oh yeah, this is potentially really good for people with autism. If the idea is you potentially struggle to understand people, and you look at people and you think, man, they must hate me, or they look incredibly bored, or, oh wow, I didn't realise my girlfriend was in a blinding rage, I thought she was fine. So what is the caveat I would put on that? Well, this is where things get a bit dark, unfortunately. So people with autism are about 6 times more likely to show self-injurious behaviour. Things like head-banging, face punching, smacking, generally speaking, kind of just shaking oneself about very violently. The point here to make is that you at some point might be developing systems where you think, I can do good with this. I can go out into the world, and you know I can help people with these kind of wearables because they're cool and machine learning is powerful, and we can do some amazing things. And the point to make, if you want to take one take-home from the idea of wearables, is, okay, it needs to be able to withstand a punch. It's honestly as simple as that. And you potentially already have that in your head with the idea of, well, this phone should be able to survive being dropped. Okay, but let's take that a step further. If you are thinking, I'm going to have some wearable and I think it could better the lives of people in certain kind of socioeconomic or medical groups that perhaps could do with their lives improving with this technology, okay, it needs to be incredibly durable. The second point with wearables, and I like this one. So when I was looking for this image, I found it described as as hidden spy cam, spy on your friends without them ever knowing, record interactions, and record interactions secretly knowing that they will never know. Now, you may or may not have noticed that a man has a camera on his forehead. I'm not joking, by the way, this isn't being facetious. That actually is supposed to be a hidden camera that you can buy from China, and maybe people don't look at people's foreheads, I don't know. But again, the point I want to make with this is that if you think, okay, so wearables, again, I think this might help you with autism. Okay, fantastic, but you're developing a technology to help people with social anxiety. And if we go back to the example of the kind of Google Glass or the Seeing AI paradigm, you're taking people that are socially anxious and you're asking them to put some technology on their face. you're asking them to say, hey, I want you to put something on that identifies you. 5 minutes remaining. Oh, no. Ooh. You're saying someone to put them on their face to say, hey, by the way, I'm maybe autistic, or hey, by the way, I use this for medical reasons. And that isn't necessarily new. There are things, obviously, like the cane. So if you have a vision impairment and you use a cane to move about, and you can also have things like the symbol cane. The symbol cane is a, say, small cane that's maybe 30 centimetres long, that is just something you can hold as a way of saying, hey, I had some kind of visual impairment, I don't need it, I don't need a literal cane to the extent of see everywhere I'm going. People have a small one say, hey, could I have a bit more room, or if I seem to be struggling, don't worry about it too much, or maybe if I ask for help, maybe take your time, things like that. But, okay, so fine training. What are some takeaways? Well, we learned a bit about some basic symptoms and stats. So the big ones that you can take away is 1 in 100, but that figure is going up or down, whichever way you want to look at it. We also talked about symptoms, so social anxiety, emotional nausea, forms of self-harm, ritualistic behaviour. And we looked at some kind of current concerns, which we can kind of tackle a bit with things like the WCAG, so auto-playing videos, garish colours, things like that. And then we talked a bit about the future accessible technologies that are out there. So things like the Blue Room, so AI environments that can perhaps help people with their phobias that perhaps traditional remedies or things like CBT might not help because they're based on, say, imagination. And we talked about tech being amazing. We talked about it being, hey, this can be a real boon for people. But we talked about the bleeding edge also potentially not being autism friendly. So things like gaming, and emojis or casual conversational interfaces, which I hate. I hate my computer now wants to say hello to me instead of just saying, hi, I'm computer, you can turn off, you can turn on. It now says, hi, what would you like to do today? I'm like, I don't want to talk to anyone. We talked about tools needing to be, so we can talk about tools having some kind of fruitful dialogue. So if I'm able to say, hey, I can now understand your facial expressions, I couldn't before, that can help. But we talked about the need for them needing to be robust. They need to be able to withstand punishment. And they either need to be subtle, i.e. invisible, or they need to be accepted by the community as a whole. Oh no, I don't know why they split over 2 lines. Oh no. So no. Let's pretend that 7 and 8 are the same thing, because they are. And any tools need to be accepted by the ASPI, i.e. the autistic community, as otherwise if you're developing tools, you need to get out there and talk to people with these conditions to say, hey, what do you think about these? But, I mean, I'm sure you all know that, by definition, as you know how important use testing is. The one caveat I'll end on is the idea of the tech I talked about today, discuss the ways that tech can help people with autism be a bit more normal. What I haven't talked about today, and what I'll try and talk about next time, is the ways in which, say, tech can actually help people who are neurotypical, e.g. without autism, actually help understand people with autism, rather than the paradigm presented today, which is perhaps the other way around. That was a whirlwind tour, and I'll say thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you.
I'll put some references up on the screen for everyone.
Do we have any questions?
The Blue Room, so it's from protection.
So,
headsets.
so the thing with headsets, especially say in the context of autism, because they actually found that by going back to sensory sensitivity, that if you had kids that can be very sensitive about people touching them, strapping something to their face was quite an uncomfortable experience for them. And part of the idea of the Blue Room is that with projections is that you could expand and contract it and make it as big or as small as that child needed, instead of necessarily saying you have to kind of have this physical device imposed upon you.
Is this technology readily available in schools?
I believe the idea is it's going to schools. I don't think it currently is, but by all means, I imagine that's where it's going. More questions?
Is there, sorry, just going slightly off the autism, but going
That's
to the
fine.
Blue Room, is that going to be used for other treatments for anxiety?
My understanding is, yeah. So my understanding is that it initially started with autism by virtue of, so if we talk about, say, GAD or generalised anxiety disorder, the idea being that generally speaking, things like CBT seem to be quite effective in a way in which they aren't with autism, but the idea being that, yeah, as a just potential treatment for anxiety as a whole, then yes. Carl, loads of questions.
Last question, I'll just tap in. So you talked about the WIC guidelines,
Yes.
and some of the ways in which systems might fail
Yes.
for people with autism. It's certainly like it was a lot of common sense, and it would be true for many other conditions, and indeed people without any sort of condition that.
You'd think it'd be
would
common
just enhance
sense.
usability more generally. What do you think?
You'd think it would be common sense.
Yes.
And yet I end up being quite well paid and doing a lot of work very consistently. So I mean, a lot of the guidelines are pretty self-explanatory. I won't grab them. So the things to say, I would Google quick ref WCAG, and you should land on a colleague of mine's website, Joe Chiswick, and they generally are all pretty broad. They will focus on screen readers and people with vision impairments. But there is a very large extent to which the checks that you can make specifically for that then kind of filter down and reach over this huge user base that make things both more usable overall. So, for example, things like, so the big one is keyboard that we go and come back to time and time again, and the idea being that you've probably had interactions where you've been going through a form, and you know what, you want to get through this form, so you're not going to mouse click through every form, you're going to tab. You're going to go tab, complete, tab, complete, tab, complete. And maybe you've had it where you've tried to do that, and it's just failed. You've tabbed and it's gone, oh, why hasn't it gone to the next form field? Oh, never mind, I'll use the mouse onto it. And in your experience, it would have been a more usable experience if you could just tab through the form fields. But in my day-to-day, I would say, well, no, that it didn't go off that form field is actively excluding people that can't use a mouse. So there's that kind of overlap between what is usable and what is just foundationally exclusionary or inclusionary. Oh, 2 questions. I want to give him the question.
Right,
That's
okay.
not right.
So in the case of Seeing AI by Microsoft,
Yes.
is the system proactive, meaning that it provides information about, it reads facial expressions and then translates that in verbal form to the user?
Yes.
Or does the user need to ask the system to provide information on that? Because considering that facial expressions can change quite, in milliseconds, would that create perhaps
So the thing I'll say about the technology at the moment, and I think this is generally true of kind of computer vision in general, is that it is definitely a work in progress. So in as much as, hey, can I try that again because the lighting wasn't quite right, or oh, you moved a bit too quickly. So at the moment it is based on the kind of idea of I take a snapshot in time rather than it being a current, always updating field. But that being the overall hope that at some point you would have an always updating field. One thing I'll say to look into, I'm pretty sure I've got notes, it's the link for Stanford University Google Glass project. So that is more so looking into having some kind of constant feedback loop, as opposed to stuff like Seeing AI, which is more aimed at people with vision impairments, where the idea being that it's not, where you constantly need information about the world, and so we would have to constantly be talking, whereas, say, with Google Glass and stuff like autism, it can be more kind of subtle, it can be more kind of gentle, rather than needing to always be saying, there's something in front of you, there's something there, there's something there, there's something there, where it can be a bit more like, the person seems happy, or, okay, they're maybe not so happy. No, Any more questions? I think there's one down here.
About the stigma, about wearing it,
Yes.
and people know. I worked with a person who has Asperger's, and once I knew he had it, it changed everything, and it was so much easier to just interact because then I knew why. I just had to tell him certain things because he would already know. So, what is from the group? What is the point of view? Like showing it or not showing it?
So it comes under the general banner of hidden disability, which is the kind of the disabilities which, I'm trying to pick my words slightly carefully here.
I have a friend who became blind. She's blind. She's very independent, so you wouldn't notice.
Yeah.
So she's wearing the I am blind, so that people, when she's asking them to describe something in the supermarket, they don't surprised.
So I think there's an extent to which I think, I don't talk about the autism community as a whole. I would say look up things like Wrong Planet, which is a great forum for people with autism. As well, do use things like use testing. BBC Ouch is another good example of that's more specifically disability in general, but there's quite a lot of interesting autism discussions there. As a general rule, I would say, in as much as it does come under that kind of hidden disability umbrella, people with it it is something that people just don't talk about. And hopefully that's the thing I want to do today, is make it a little bit less taboo, I guess.
Just one, I'm going to the thing about wearable we've almost come to accept, is, as you said, I think you were saying how obvious really in the future, why they shouldn't be. Really, so I mean, I don't know how you see that having an impact in the future when wearables becomes much more blended and personalized.
So the hope for me with that, specifically to that point, is designing technologies that aren't kind of one use. So you don't develop, oh, those are the glasses that an autistic person wears. Oh, that's the. So for example, what I have on the screen here is some examples of different canes that exist. So there's things like the red and white banded cane, which is to communicate that someone is deafblind. There's long canes, sky canes, there's symbol canes. And the idea is, particularly with that kind of wearable technology, the thing I'd hope for is that you just have one thing, and it doesn't say, oh, hey, I'm autistic, I'm not autistic. It's just saying, oh, this is just the thing that everyone wears. But the designers have taken this universal design paradigm of saying, oh, we design it for everyone, they can do everything kind of thing. Which isn't necessarily going to happen because there's always going to be different products on the market, but hopefully those different products kind of capture lots of different audiences and don't just think, oh, we exclude those users, so another product will have to only be for those users, and in which case it potentially becomes a political statement.
Right, I think this one final question, then we'll wrap up. Sorry, I just thought you're just sneaking in there.
Thank you for your talk.
You're welcome.
To understand about the design process, which kind of guides how to work at AbilityNet. So draw lots of examples on working towards characteristics that typical people take. How does it work at AbilityNet?
That's going to be a long answer, I'm afraid.
Maybe I'll ask over the top of it.
Can you summarise it briefly and then continue at lunchtime perhaps?
Short answer, our process involves getting in on the design review phase with as many people as we can. They send us wireframes and we will just go through them on a very kind of fine-tooth comb saying, these are the things we see time and time again, we do lots and lots of use testing, these are the things we hear back from people, these are the guidelines we're aware of, and these are the kind of really common gotchas that we see time and time again. They take that on board, they develop it, they then show us the system when it's in a kind of staging or dev environment, and then we audit it against those guidelines where we can say it passes and fails certain things, and then adjunct to that we do user testing with a kind of diverse user base where we don't just say we get in people who are able-bodied in their 20s, we get people who are silver surfers, we get people who are young, we get people with autism, people who are blind, people with motor impairments, and they will look at the system and they'll go, yeah, I can't use it at all. Shit. And we feed that back to the client and they go, oh, geez. And then we just kind of continue that process up to the point where we get really happy with it. So I can talk more specifically about autism, but that's it in a nutshell, or my day job in a nutshell.
Great, thank you very much.